About 12:03. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our webinar today. I am Dorian Kraus, and I will be introducing our speakers and giving a brief overview. Welcome to the CLF Rocky Mountain Hub. I'm one of the co-chairs for our Rocky Mountain Hub here in Colorado. Today, we will be learning about the House Bill HB 21-1303 by Clean Colorado Act. And who better to learn about this than from these two within Colorado. We have Bailey Vigil with the Office of the State Architect and Haley Goodale with the Colorado Department of Transportation. And before I hand it over to them, I will be going through a few announcements and our agenda for today. So first, you'll be listening to me for a few minutes at the beginning, and then I will obviously hand it off to Bailey and Haley for the main presentation. And then at the end, we'll leave about 10 minutes for questions. We'd like to just make a few announcements in the news that involve embodied carbon, the first of which is the EPA's $100 million grant program, which I hope most of you have heard of, recently passed to help with EPD generation across the US. These funds are open to all manufacturers, and they can award up to 40 grants, receiving between $250,000 and $10 million for EPD development. If you want to learn more, they have an informational webinar coming up in the coming weeks, and the link is on this slide. Second announcement we want to make is the ECHO project, which is an embodied carbon harmonization and optimization collaborative initiative, which aims to ensure that all embodied carbon reporting at the whole building and whole project scale within the US will follow the same clear definitions and scopes of included impacts. This initiative was initially launched by AAA 2030 this year. However, in the coming year of 2024, CLF will take over the facilitation of it. There's also discussion of joint participation in a central data repository of whole building, whole project embodied carbon data points for buildings and infrastructure projects to assist in policymaking and standard setting efforts. An exciting event we're planning for the upcoming year, 2024, we'll be hosting an in-person happy hour. More information to come. Sorry, this cut off the January 18th text a bit, but we're hoping for January 18th, more details to come on location and time, but we'll be downtown Denver. And I'll jump into a brief CLF overview. We might have some new people here today that haven't attended a CLF webinar, so we want to go over a bit about us, and I will start with our hub. So we have 4 co-chairs. On the far left, Michaela DeRousseau with Building Transparency. On second, we have Victoria Herrero Garcia with Mead and Hunt, who has been a co-chair with this hub for many years. Myself, Dorian Kraus, and Bailey Vigil with Office of the State Architect, who is presenting today as well. So the Carbon Leadership Forum. CLF is an industry academic collaboration at the University of Washington. The goal of CLF is to accelerate the transformation of the building sector to radically reduce embodied carbon in building materials and construction. CLF conducts research, creates resources, fosters cross-collaboration, and really empowers member-led initiatives to bring embodied carbon emissions down to zero. What I really love most about CLF is the diversity in industry expertise. We are architects, engineers, contractors, material suppliers, building owners, policymakers, and much more. So it's a really fun mix of people and backgrounds, and you can read a lot more on the main website. So in addition to the regional hubs, CLF has a lot of focus groups that you can join if a topic suits your interests. Here are 15 interest groups. The bottom 5 are fairly new additions. ISO Environmental Standards, MEP 2040, Operational Carbon, Tally, and Passive House. The top 10 have been around for a few years. So if you are interested in joining the Carbon Leadership Forum, you simply create a CLF account. Just follow the link on this slide And once you're in the community section, select groups and choose from whichever regional hub or focus group you'd like. Of course, at the very least, we would like you to join the Rocky Mountain Hub if you're based in the Colorado area. That way you can stay tuned into what we're doing and any resources that we have to offer. And lastly, here are a few ways to contact us. We have a great YouTube channel as well at the bottom here that has a lot of our webinars that we've hosted if you find a topic that you're interested in. And with that, I will be handing this off to Bailey to start the main presentation.
Awesome. Let me share my screen quick. Great. Everything's looking good.
Looks great.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Thank you, Dorian, for that great opening. And thank you for having us. For some quick introductions of each of us, I'll start. My name is Bailey Behill. My working title is Buildings Greenhouse Gas Emissions Analyst, and I've worked at the Office of the State Architect for just under 2 years now. And I'll let Haley introduce herself now.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name is Haley Goodell. I work as a pavement design engineer for the Colorado Department of Transportation, and I've worked in pavement design about 2.5 years. And then I've been on our EPD implementation team since its inception about 2 years ago.
Thanks, Haley. So thank you again for having us, and a huge thank you to the Carbon Leadership Forum Rocky Mountain Hub team for hosting the event. We'll start today's discussion off with a brief legislative overview of the Buy Clean Colorado Act, and then we'll touch on some of the responsibilities shared between OSA and CDOT that are making it happen. So for our legislative overview, House Bill 21-1303 was approved in July of 2021 and assigns responsibilities for building construction to the Office of the State Architect, or OSA, and for road, highway, and bridge construction to the Colorado Department of Transportation, CDOT. The bill requires OSA and CDOT to strive to achieve a continuous reduction of greenhouse gas emissions over time. And the way to do this is we are requiring that for invitation for bid for contracts for public projects, we will require the contractor who is awarded the contract to submit an environmental product declaration, type 3, meaning it's third-party verified, for each eligible material proposed to be used in the public project. So some key takeaway points here are that the legislation is split between 2 departments. OSA is responsible for vertical construction projects, and CDOT is responsible for the horizontal construction projects. We will note the distinctions in our presentation today, utilizing the building icon for OSA and the road icon for CDOT. Another takeaway is that both departments are working to achieve a continuous reduction of greenhouse gas emissions over time, and we are doing so through the use of environmental product declarations, or EPDs. And even though we are implementing policy for very different project types, we still share some responsibilities between our 2 groups. These shared responsibilities include: 1, CDOT and OSA shall establish by policy maximum acceptable global warming potential, or GWP limit, for each category of eligible materials. The GWP limit may include transportation related emissions, well, looking at that A4 section. CDOT and OSA may establish subcategories within each eligible material category with distinct maximum GWP limits. And 3, CDOT and OSA shall review the GWP for each eligible material, and we may adjust the number to reflect industry conditions. However, the caveat here is that we shall not adjust the policy for any eligible material to be less stringent. So the takeaway here is that neither department can increase the GWP limits after we set them. This means that it's very important that we set the GWP limits properly from the beginning. The only way that we can truly reduce the embodied carbon within our projects is to set benchmarks and work to meet and reduce those benchmarks over time. Awesome. Now we'll get into what this means for each of our departments and the responsibilities necessary for success. I will start with the Office of the State Architect, responsibilities and requirements. So, what does this mean for OSA? Per statute, eligible project means a public project defined as any construction, alteration, repair, demolition, or improvement of any land, building, structure, facility, or other public improvement for which appropriation or expenditure of monies is over $500,000, and for which an agency of government issues a solicitation on or after January 1st of 2024. So I'll pause right there and pick out a couple of things from this definition. First, it lays out we have a monetary threshold for projects. Any projects that exceed $500,000 will be subject to these requirements, and for which an agency of government issues a solicitation on or after January 1st of 2024. So our projects are focused on those ran by agencies of government. And those that begin solicitation on or after January 1st, this upcoming year, will be subject to these requirements. In addition, our list of eligible materials includes asphalt and asphalt mixtures, cement and concrete mixtures, glass, post-tension steel, reinforcing steel, structural steel, and wood structural elements. This is quite a comprehensive list of materials compared to other Buy Clean legislations. However, these material categories have been identified as top contributors to embodied carbon emissions within vertical construction projects. So, reducing the impacts of these materials will provide the greatest reduction in embodied carbon emissions over time for our project types. And with these requirements, there are a number of responsibilities that must be fulfilled in order to make it all work. Next, I will walk through the responsibilities necessary for compliance. So let's start with the project owner responsibilities. For the Office of the State Architect, project owners are state agencies or institutions of higher education. More specifically, state agencies are entities such as the Department of Human Services or the Department of Public Health and Safety. And institutions of higher education refers to state-funded institutions such as University of Colorado or Pueblo Community College. So this does not impact every project that occurs in the state. Instead, it is focused on projects ran by state agencies and institutions of higher education. We have delegates within each agency and institution, so those are the people responsible for running the projects and ultimately responsible for these requirements. So, for any new projects that are in solicitation beginning on or after January 1st, 2024, agency and institution of higher education delegates shall, 1, require consultants to specify EPDs for all eligible materials considered in the design. They shall, 2, require contractors to submit EPDs for all procured eligible materials prior to site installation. And C, they shall submit EPDs to the Office of the State Architect as part of the L1 code compliance documentation. Next, I'll run through the designer responsibilities because these will play a huge difference in how the project plays out. So for new projects that are in solicitation, consultants shall, 1, prioritize products with EPDs for the design, 2, specify an EPD for each eligible material considered in the design, and C, verify that the GWP value included in each EPD is less than or equal to the maximum acceptable GWP limits as established by OSA. And I must apologize, we are getting cut off on a few images here, must be from downloading the PowerPoint. So my apologies there. But key takeaway from this slide is that design consultants need to verify that the EPDs supplied match the materials that are specified and that the GWP as reported in a product's EPD complies with OSA's limits. So what does this process look like for a contractor? For any new projects that are in solicitation beginning on or after our January 1st, 2024 date, contractors shall, 1, obtain EPDs for all eligible materials procured for a public project. 2, they shall submit compliant EPDs to the agency or institution delegate prior to installation on site. And C, contractors shall inform delegates if a waiver process may be needed. So for OSA, compliance will involve a number of people. Agency and institution delegates are required to manage the projects, but obtaining EPDs comes from the design consultant specifying materials with EPDs, and then contractors procuring products with EPDs. However, OSA will be involved with any new waiver requests that occur in the near future, as we want to ensure that we are treating all projects equally and keeping track of program requirements. Ooh, so with all this talk about EPDs, what kind of EPDs will be accepted by the Office of the State Architect? For OSA's purposes, Environmental Product Declaration, or EPD, or Type 3 EPD, means a third-party verified document that summarizes stages A1 through A3 of a life cycle assessment for a single product and publicly discloses its environmental impacts. For an EPD to be deemed approved, A, the EPD must be a current product-specific Type 3 EPD. B, the EPD must reference all ISO standards, including ISO 14025, ISO 14040, ISO 14044, and ISO 21930. You can find these standards listed in the LCA background data section or throughout the EPD, but it's important that EPDs do reference these standards. And C, EPD must align with the applicable product category rule requirements. Agencies, consultants, and contractors shall demonstrate compliance with these requirements by verifying that the GWP value in the submitted EPD is less than or equal to the maximum acceptable GWP limit as established by OSA for each eligible material. And we have included this definition within the OSA policy as well as on our website, so it is available if you want to read into it some more. Next, I'd like to touch on some of the OSA key dates for the Buy Clean Colorado Act implementation timeline. Okay, so back in July of 2022, OSA created the draft OSA policy and posted it along with EPD resources on the OSA website as of July 1st, 2022. So we do have a Buy Clean Colorado Act webpage on the OSA website with all of our information available as it is released. We've included this link later on in the slide deck if you're interested in checking that out. Moving forward to January of 2023. During this time, OSA was working to conduct association outreach to associations that represent the eligible material categories. We held an association meeting to determine industry EPD readiness, as well as met with individual association members to better understand each eligible material category. These meetings went well. We learned lots of information from the associations, and we've been using this information to better the program as much as we can. Then in July of 2023, OSA determined draft GWP limits based on available EPDs and industry average GWP values and posted the draft GWP limits to our website on July 1st of 2023. Not mentioned here is that we actually determined the industry average GWP values earlier in the year and then shared these with some of our clientele for feedback. This feedback determined that for some eligible material categories, OSA needed to increase the GWP limit above the industry average from the start. So we reviewed each EPD further, and we determined the percentage of US market share that contributed to each EPD's development and used that information to determine if we should add uncertainty to the limits. We did choose to add uncertainty to a few limits that demonstrated 50% or less US market share, such as asphalt mixtures, cement, flat glass, and rebar. For those materials, we adopted the General Service Administration's max GWP threshold with uncertainty. So we feel pretty confident with where our draft GWP limits stand now. However, they are available on the OSA website, so feel free to review them and email me with any feedback that you may have prior to the end of this year. Moving forward, in January 2024, as mentioned a number of times, the OSA policy will go into effect for public projects greater than $500,000 that begin solicitation on or after January 1st. This is when the GWP limits go into effect, and once established, the policy cannot be adjusted to be less stringent for any material. So this is the big date that we are working towards for OSA's purposes. We've been creating EPD submittal processes to incorporate into the pre-existing project requirements as well as waiver documents, because we are aware that not every project has an EPD at this time. And then following the January implementation date and moving forward, we are planning to conduct state agency training and compliance review. OSA will be involved with all waiver requests for the first year or so to ensure equality between projects. We will train the delegates on their responsibilities and ensure that the program requirements are being met. In addition to these key dates, we will have a report due to the General Assembly in 2026 to describe how the program is going and any issues that we've encountered. And while we are gathering information for this report now, our main focus in the meantime will be to ensure that the program is operating correctly and that we are considering any nuances that may arise. So this is what OSA implementation has looked like in a nutshell. Next, I will pass it on to Haley to discuss the CDOT responsibilities and requirements.
Thanks, Bailey. That was great info. So what does House Bill 21-1303 mean to CDOT? First, I'll get into a few brief definitions. So a public project is one that, public project means all publicly bid construction projects or others as determined by CDOT. We're not currently collecting EPDs on local agency projects, but that might change as those folks are ready to dive into these requirements. And then eligible materials listed in the bill. The list is shorter than OSA's list. Those are asphalt and asphalt mixtures, cement and concrete mixtures, and steel. Our section of the law didn't separate out reinforcing and structural, but we are currently collecting EPDs on both of those. And we are also collecting EPDs on precast. So while not explicitly listed, we figured it has concrete and it has steel, so we should probably collect EPDs on those. Next slide, please. You can skip through these little pictures of our eligible materials. Awesome, thank you. And then I'll note, after a lot of data analysis, which is detailed in a white paper on our webpage, we also determined small quantity material limits and then small project cost thresholds under which EPDs won't be required. And those are published in the CDOT Field Materials Manual and our protocol document, which is Appendix O. Next slide, please. So one of our biggest focus points to date has been industry outreach. And based on an evaluation of kind of current state of practice of each of the eligible materials, we elected to start year one on those materials ready to go. So those included ready mixed concrete, reinforcing steel, and asphalt. We've been working with the industry associations for those other materials over the last year and a half to kind of get them caught up and make sure that they were ready to provide EPDs and meet our requirements. So we hosted multiple workshops and feedback meetings with each of the individual associations, as well as with CDOT staff, consultants, contractors, and other agencies such as FHWA. We did allow industry to review and provide comments on our requirements before they were implemented. They really appreciated that, and we're continuing that process as we update our documents. And then we're also actively involved in multiple PCR committees to kind of improve the current state of US PCRs and EPDs. What EPDs are we accepting? We are strongly requesting facility and supply chain specific data so that the limits we set by policy are accurate and they reflect the materials being placed in Colorado. Once our policy and GWP limits are set, we might have to start requiring facility specific and supply chain specific EPDs. But right now we're just strongly requesting. And then in terms of timing, we're asking for EPDs 2 weeks prior to material placement for paving materials. And then for precast and steel, they would provide the EPD upon delivery to the job site. And the last bullet is my favorite of any presentations I give because I think it's really important to make very clear. We in no way intend to sacrifice performance with the use of EPDs, as the least sustainable material is the one you have to rip out and replace all the time. And then second, we do not intend to compare dissimilar materials, especially as the current PCRs aren't compatible. Next slide, please. Now I'll get into some key dates of CDOT's portion. So in July of 2022, we began collecting EPDs and requiring the winning bidder to submit EPDs for eligible materials. Those EPDs could have basically been any number, any value, and that's still the case. And so we're going to take all of the information we collect between last July and January of 2025 and establish benchmarks and GWP limits. So January 1st of 2025, we'll publish our policy. And then for projects advertised after July 1st of 2025, the winning contractor will be required to submit EPDs, but this time they must be below our GWP limits. And starting in 2026, we will begin reporting on our progress to legislature. Then in 2027 and every 4 years thereafter, we must review the policy and we can adjust it based on industry conditions. And like Bailey was saying, once we set our limits, we cannot make them any less stringent. So now I'll get into some resources. We know that this is a lot of information and some folks might not be ready to hand in EPDs immediately. So we've tried to develop some tools for not only our stakeholders, but also other agencies and states trying to implement buy clean policies. So here are links to each of the eligible materials program operator websites. That's where you'll find published EPDs for that material. You'll find the product category rule. You'll find various tools that can be used in EPD development and active members more. So those are great resources for each of those eligible materials. And then there are also some resources linked here that have been developed by non-government organizations like Building Transparency and Sustainable Minds. And if you're interested or kind of trying to dive into this topic, I'd urge you to check those out. Now I will turn it back over to Bailey to summarize some of the activities we've performed to implement Buy Clean Colorado Act so far, and then we'll both discuss some of the challenges that we've experienced that we're working to address.
Awesome. Thanks, Haley, and learned a lot. Thank you. Perfect. For a summary of our activities thus far, OSA and CDOT have conducted association outreach and meetings to gain a better understanding of each material category. You've heard about those efforts on both sides. In addition, OSA and CDOT have determined eligible material subcategories based on available products with EPDs. We've both been looking at what products really impact our types of projects and seeing what EPDs are available out there. CDOT started collecting eligible project EPDs beginning July 1st of 2022. OSA determined eligible material industry average GWP values, and we conducted outreach regarding these industry average GWP limits. And after receiving input, we chose to adopt the GSA GWP limits for products with less than 50% US market share. Once again, those are asphalt mixtures, cement, flat glass, and rebar. And then finally, OSA and CDOT are always conducting industry outreach. Our goals now are to verify, at least on the OSI side, the draft GWP limits. We want to ensure that we are working with industry and meeting their requirements as well. And along the way, we've experienced some implementation challenges. And here we have a list of bolded information. It may not seem like a lot given that we left out some details, but there is quite a bit to this information. And really, if you know about these challenges, it is a lot to take in. And for those of you who may be impacted by Buy Clean policies either now or in the future, we just want to leave you with some things to consider. Implementing a program like this is not easy, and there's a lot of room for improvement. Some of the challenges we've encountered so far include: one, communication gaps. So there are non-members and unaware project staff that have to learn about these new requirements. And so the challenge for us is, what is the most effective way to include and communicate to suppliers who are maybe not members of their industry trade organizations? Really, it's wanting to get the word out there when this is new information for some people. A second challenge, the potential burden on small suppliers. This is not something that we've encountered quite yet, but it is anticipated. So how do we address it? Another challenge, timing. EPDs take time to develop. How can we verify that the suppliers that the contractors choose to use will have EPDs before material placement? Who knows, there could be changes to mix designs, batch plant locations, sources, and more. Limited personnel is another challenge. As this was an unfunded mandate, there is very limited CDOT and OSA personnel available to perform necessary tasks such as database management and quality assurance. So the question becomes, how can we streamline the process to reduce workload? There's also the need to establish project personnel roles to perform submission, verification, and quality assurance activities. And speaking of database management, CDOT is currently collecting and storing EPDs with an on-base form, which unfortunately is a little clunky. Working towards a more streamlined solution that will include reporting and data analysis capabilities. But how do we make the EPD submission process simpler for contracts while ensuring we get accurate data for benchmarking? A good challenge to work through. And here's a fun one, verification and accuracy. So challenges do arise in accurate data collection for benchmarking used on CDOT projects due to the current granularity of EPD reporting, which does not allow for verification that the placed material corresponds to the material represented by the EPD. This is not only a challenge for CDOT, but very much for OSA. How do we verify that the products being installed on site actually correspond to the information submitted to us? Another issue, or challenge I prefer, is the utilization of industry average data in EPD development, which is currently allowed by PCRs. However, it has the potential to significantly skew GWP values. As a result, our best efforts at representative benchmarking and limit setting may not be fully realized. However, to our benefit, CDOT is working with PCR program operators to address these issues, but it is not a quick or simple process. And then lack of knowledge or unknowns. So it is currently unknown how our EPD requirements will impact material costs, how improvement to data sets will impact key EPD metrics, or how changes to current tools and reporting will impact the state of practice. Contractors and suppliers have also raised concerns about the potential challenges of meeting different policy requirements for various governing agencies as more by-theme policies are implemented across the nation, which could cause misalignment in the policy requirements. We are working with other agencies who are currently or are considering implementing EPD programs to alleviate the conflicts, but it is an ongoing consideration. And yes, EPDs do not exist for every product quite yet. One example that's near and dear to me is that there are flat glass EPDs available out there, but processed glass EPDs are still a work in progress. And past that, window EPDs still have a long ways to go. So it's a work in progress, but we're doing the best we can. And then my final point here is that similar products may have varying GWP values based on regionally available constituent components. So one product made in Colorado could vary in GWP impacts from a product made in Wyoming. I mean, maybe that's a bad example. But just to say that the constituent components used in some of these materials may have varying impacts state by state, which would cause varying GWP values represented in those EPDs. So Joy, many challenges, and I'm sure there's more to come. And then finally, we'd like to touch on our next steps and provide you with our resources before we give you time to ask some questions. So our next steps, OSA policy goes into effect on January 1st of 2024. We are expecting to receive EPDs late in 2024 at the earliest. So we are currently working to finalize our waiver process, our EPD submittal process, and our solicitation and contract updates, which are quite a bit. And we are going to conduct state agency and institution training following policy enactment. And I will let Haley speak on CDOT's next steps.
Thanks, Bailey. So CDOT's policy goes into effect January 1st of 2025. And as I mentioned earlier, we already began our EPD collection, but that policy will be based on the EPDs we collect between now and then. Iterative growth for industries not ready to provide EPDs yet. So for example, cold rolled steel is still a kind of data gap. So we're trying to find the right people to talk to and get them up to speed. We're also working with a consultant, subject matter expert, and academia via the FHWA Climate Challenge. And that effort is one, to support our program further. We were able to get some funding initially to do the beginning work, but there's still a lot more to go. Number two, we will be establishing benchmarks for our materials. We'll be establishing subcategories within those broader material categories, and we will be writing our policy. And then number three, we'll be looking at kind of how we could incorporate additional life cycle stages into our decision-making processes. And that's not going to be a procedural requirement. We are just curious to see kind of how that could play out. And then lastly, we're continuously reaching out to industry organizations and material suppliers. And now on to some resources and support. Both OSA and CDOT have additional resources. If you're curious, please review the web pages and feel free to reach out to either of us if you have questions or we can be of assistance. And then I will turn it over to Bailey to finish up.
Thanks, Haley. I just have one final note. The Office of the State Architect is undergoing some internal updates. We are now under a new division, the Division of State Property. The OSA will continue to exist and our roles in our Energy and Environment group will continue. However, we may experience website updates at some point. If this is the case, we will work to make sure that all previous OSA website links remain valid to the new web page. However, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of this update in the case that you try to access our website at some point and you see that it may have changed. So if at any point you have any issues accessing the website, or if you have any questions for us, please reach out to us at our contact emails listed above. This will be the fastest way to get in touch with our groups. Thank you. And thank you again for having us. We are now open for questions. Okay, looks like Jim, you can unmute yourself, ask away.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I have two questions. First, do you have more refined or detailed definitions of eligible materials in each of those categories?
So CDOT has, in our Appendix O of our field materials manual, we have a table that lists all of the individual bid items requiring EPDs. And then we've also developed a spreadsheet tool that people can put their bid items into it and it'll spit out basically what EPDs are needed based on those bid items. And then if maybe an EPD is not needed because it's a small quantity.
Does that filter by like CSI category or something else?
So most horizontal construction agencies use bid items. So each material has a specific number associated with it. And then I'll let Bailey speak to the horizontal or the vertical side.
Thanks, Haley. I will mention that the CSI numbers, I've been having issues corresponding those specific products to products with EPDs, and that is why we do not have that information listed out that way.
Okay.
But we are defining our eligible material categories based on products, subcategories that fit within those categories.
Okay, great. And second question is what happens if a project doesn't meet these requirements? Are they going to be penalized?
Yes, I can start with that. So we are working on a waiver process at the Office of State Architect for instances where maybe during the design or construction, we can't obtain a product with an EPD, or the GWP limit exceeds, or the GWP value included in the EPD exceeds the limit. So there will be a waiver process in place both during design and construction, depending on the situation. And that's how we're handling that. We aren't looking to penalize anyone for not complying, instead provide waivers as necessary.
Great, thank you.
And then for the CDOT side of things, we don't currently have a waiver process in place, but we anticipate that we'll need to at some point. We are working on non-compliance kind of at the project level. So reaching out to the project staff, the contractors, figuring out if there's a reason they haven't been able to meet the requirements, and if we can support them in any way.
Thanks, Jim. Christopher, go ahead.
Hi, Bailey. Yeah, it's Chris Sensney from CU Boulder. I had a quick question. You had mentioned that for the OSA limits that you adopted GSA limits for products that had less than a 50% market share. Could you explain that a little bit, and what you mean by that market share?
Yes, so we took a look at all the EPDs we had and determined what percent of US companies contributed towards that EPD's development. And if we determined that it was greater than 50%, then that the industry average GWP values are representative of a greater portion of US products. And it's for instances where there was less than that market share, maybe, for example, glass. Not all the US glass manufacturers contributed to that industry-wide EPD. So then at that, we determined that we should add some uncertainty to the GWP limit to make sure that we aren't excluding a significant portion of products.
Okay, so the percentage of companies are contributing to the industry-wide EPD?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? And feel free to
Bailey,
unmute yourself. Yeah.
there is a question in the chat.
Ah,
Mackenzie Glass posted, and Mackenzie, you're welcome to ask it if you want to, or otherwise Bailey or Haley can answer.
yeah, I can read it aloud. The question is, will the structural engineer be required to stamp the EPD submittal in order for them to receive a CO? For example, no exceptions taken, or revise and resubmit, or is acceptance given through writing via email? So I will talk about the OSA side a little bit. We are working on developing an EPD submittal and sign-off spreadsheet. So this will have entries for both the design consultant as well as the contractor to input information about the eligible materials that they specify or procure for the project. And they will need to include some of the EPD information in there, and then sign off on that form and receive final sign off from our agency or institution delegate to provide that verification that it does comply and that the entries were entered correctly. So yes, please elaborate more if I did not answer that correct, how you wanted.
Just to follow up on that, thank you for that presentation and for that answer. I think, so in order to fill out that form, did you say that would be the contractor filling out the form, or the delegate?
It would be all three. So there'll be a component for the design consultant to fill out, the contractor to fill out, and then the agency or institution delegate.
Okay, so essentially the acceptance or rejection of an EPD would fall underneath that spreadsheet for each of those professions, essentially.
Totally. And how we're working on doing that is we'll have a drop-down menu. You select your eligible material category, the subcategory that has a GWP limit associated with it, and then that GWP will pop up. So then when you're reviewing an EPD and you see and you enter the GWP from that EPD, it'll show whether, yes, this complies with the policy or no, it does not. And that will trigger your knowing whether you need to ask for a waiver.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Michaela.
Nice job, guys. Good to hear it from direct from you guys. You mentioned the kind of A4 and transportation as a possibility, and I was wondering if there are discussions or how likely you think, if you can share any of that, you think it might be included in some of the limits, knowing that, I mean, maybe for ready mix concrete, it's not as much of a issue, but for such a kind of like, oh, this is a statewide limits that are going to be set, and then there's going to be all these folks trying to comply and possibly all these supply chain things going on. So I was wondering how A4 might be baked in, and if you think it is an important problem.
Right. Haley, I know I answered the last one, so I'll let you jump in if you have any immediate thoughts.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. Currently, CDOT's really trying to focus on A1 through A3 kind of, so it can have a foundational program that's well-oiled, and then in the future that could be a consideration, but at least CDOT isn't focusing on that at this time.
Thank you, Haley. I will take over from there. So per our statute, we are permitted to look at stage A4 transportation emissions. And how we're doing that at OSA is we are not looking to require them in the GWP limit. Instead, we are looking to require similar to LEED. If you obtain this product from over 100 miles away from the project site, we are looking at asking for the transportation emission that results. So that would be, what is that product? How much does it weigh? What is that transportation distance and how is it transported? There is a way to estimate those A4 emissions by multiplying that distance, the emissions factor, which is based on the type of transportation used, and the weight of the shipment, and then you can get an estimate. So we are looking at incorporating that into the EPD submittal spreadsheet. So there'll be another button. Did you procure this from over 100 miles away? If so, report in the A4 sheet, and then it'll just be entries, that weight, shipment type, and distance, and then it'll estimate that. But we, as mentioned, we aren't looking at requiring that in the GWP limit, just if as an additional requirement.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Michaela. Alexis Vitel, go ahead.
Yeah, so I have a question, I guess kind of similarly, I know you guys are focusing on A1 through A3 for those GWP limits. What do you imagine the scenario being if a project is wanting to use salvage materials? Because, obviously that's an embodied carbon win, but at the same time, those materials are certainly lacking in EPDs. So would that scenario kind of fall into the waiver requirement, or how would you kind of see that playing out?
Thank you for that question. We've had great questions, so thanks everyone. I will start with that. We are only looking at, for OSA, we're only looking at products, eligible materials that we have been able to establish GWP limits for with EPDs. So if those materials are not considered an eligible material, then they do not need to comply with these requirements. They won't need to submit an EPD. So if it falls in that category, then no, they won't need to. But if it does, and per se it doesn't have an EPD, that will be one of those instances that trigger a waiver.
And on the CDOT side of things, we use lots of recycled materials such as recycled concrete aggregate and recycled asphalt pavements. And those reused materials are accounted for in the EPD values, if that makes sense.
So many more.
Haley, this is Victoria. Can you I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you explain a little bit more about what you just say? You're saying like that is included in the APD as a waste product from the PCR, and that's why you could use the EPD from the original material, or what is that? If you can explain further, thank you.
Yeah. So each PCR and each material category has a different way of allocating waste materials or byproducts. And so it's per the PCR. I can't say definitively for all materials, it's handled the same way. But yeah, the EPDs are based on the PCRs, which say if you're using this material, this is how you kind of allocate it. And it ends up being less than if you were to use a virgin material. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. So what you're saying is that if that is the case, a product to comply, a product could, I know CDOT is not requiring the same as OSA, but if I'm submitting an EPD for concrete and or for the asphalt, I would use the EPD from the industry-wide.
No, it would be mix specific. We're looking for mix specific EPDs.
But
And
if it's reused, how do you get that mix specific? You just have the plant provide you with the mix specific EPD, even if the batch is reused?
yeah, so it's hard to explain. Let's say you're using recycled asphalt pavement as part of your mix design in an asphalt mixture. Not all of the binders going to be wrap, just a portion of it. So the Asphalt Emerald Eco-Label tool, you'll put in your percentage of wrap, recycled asphalt pavement, and then it will calculate the EPD based on your reduction in virgin materials. Does that help?
Yes, that makes
Okay.
sense. Thank you. But
You're
I
welcome.
think Alexis goes more on the question of like a still reuse, or like an element that you will be utilizing like salvage material. So in that case, Bailey, you're saying that at this point, a waiver will be the best way to go for a project that will be reusing or salvaging materials?
Yeah. I'm thinking so. We'll look into adding that because it makes sense why we want something with less embodied carbon. And if it doesn't fall in our categories, yeah, I think that's where it's going to trigger a waiver. I'll look into that further and see how we can weave that in.
Thank you. Yeah, because tracking the EPD from the original material might be very challenging to do. Okay.
Thank you. Great question.
And I do have a question as well. How do you anticipate the process to like the timing? Because if I'm requesting the funding and I'm submitting all the documentation, like is it going to take longer to get a permit? Like the timeline for a project that didn't have to meet those requirements might take shorter than now. So how are you anticipating to build that in, or like what projects will need to do to account for the time that it would take to be verified?
Yes, from OSA perspective, they will get all the documents that they'll have to fill out, spreadsheets and such from the beginning. So in theory, I would like to see designers fill out their section as they're working on their material specifications, maybe even after they have their spec list, and they fill out that section. It's approved by the agency institution delegate, and then the contractor receives the spreadsheet and fills it in for the materials that they procure. And then that gets signed off. It is due to OSA during the L1 code compliance phase, so at occupancy. We are hoping to have that information back to us before the contractors off the project, and they allow the building to have people in it. And so that's what we're looking at, getting that information submitted to us during occupancy phase, so then they can proceed with their closeout and have their requirements met. Hopefully that answers that.
Yes, thank you. And from Haley's perspective?
Yeah, I don't anticipate project delays occurring based or due to our EPD requirements. So when the contractor bids the project, they're aware that they have an EPD requirement if the specification is in there. And then we're also requesting to be invited to all of the pre-pave, pre-construction, and pre-bid meetings for eligible projects so that we can make contract staff, material suppliers, contractor aware of what we're going to ask for and when they need to submit it. And then there have been a few cases that an EPD wasn't able to be developed 2 weeks prior to material placement. A big one with that is the tool doesn't currently allow for mobile batch plant EPDs for asphalt. And so we are keeping track of all of those issues and then following up with the projects and suppliers as soon as they're able to do so.
Thanks, Victoria. Any more for us? Yeah, just a minute or so, so maybe one more. If not. Well, thank you again for having us. Thank you, Carbon Leadership Forum Rocky Mountain Hub, and everyone for tuning in. We appreciate you listening to us today. Reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank y'all.